The next place we're visiting is St. Peter's Episcopal Church. This is on land that was donated by one Philip English in 1633. And Philip English was accused, along with his wife, of being a witch in the witch trials of 1692. And the reason that this church is standing there is directly related to some of the fallout of the witch trials. Anyway, let me give you a little bit of background for the witch trials. They begin in February of 1692 when the daughters of the Reverend Samuel Parris start having fits. They are believed to be possessed. And as a complete and utter coincidence, the people that Reverend Parris believes have possessed his daughters are the neighbors in Salem Village. Yes, all this begins in Salem Village, not Salem Town, which is today the city of Salem. Salem Village is today Danvers. The people that had voted to deprive him of his salary a few months earlier. I know, it's a complete coincidence. Who would have thunk it? You know, his neighbors were witches. Anywho, it gets kind of out of control after the testimony of Samuel Parris's slave, Tituba. And he invites some friends from Salem Town to come up and sort out this witch trial stuff. And, charming people like Judge John Hathorne and Judge Jonathan Corwin and Sheriff George Corwin, great humanitarians. Hanging judges, all sets of great. Anyway, the fanaticism of the early trials in the tavern in Salem Village and later the meeting house gets out of control, and it expands beyond Salem Village over the entirety of Essex County and comes to the attention of the governor, William Phips, who's just brought back a new charter from England. Anyway, Phips looks at his lieutenant governor, Staunton, and says, hey, what do you think we should do with this? Staunton says, hey, we think we should form a court of voye termine and kind of sort out this witch trial stuff. Well, Phips says, great, you lead that. Let me wash my hands of this and have nothing to do with it. Well, Staunton presides over this, and they get rolling right here in Salem Town. Well, the analogy with Pontius Pilate and William Phips is not accidental. He is a man of a similar character. He is a man that made his fortune when his ship discovered a sunken Spanish galleon off the island of Hispaniola that had 3,000 pounds of gold in it. And there definitely wasn't any piracy going on. Anyway, he was a barely literate man who loved a good fight. And like I'd mentioned in the previous story, this is the midst of Queen Anne's Wars. So what does he do? He says, catch you later, Staunton. I'm heading up to Nova Scotia. I'm going to besiege Port Royal. Catch you later. Hope it goes well. Anywho, though, as I was saying, the witch trials kind of get out of control. It gets bigger and bigger. They start out arresting vagrants like Sarah Good and malcontents like Bridget Bishop, as well as, of course, Parris's most favorite persons list in Salem Village. But it eventually expands to the richest person in the colony, and that was Philip English. Well, to give you an idea of how wealthy Philip English was, in Salem alone, he owned 21 ships and 14 warehouses. That's roughly equivalent to 170,000 pounds. As an economic share, in modern American money, that would be roughly equivalent to $10 billion. That is not his entire fortune. He is massively wealthy. He is massively important to the economy of Salem and to Massachusetts more broadly. When he gets accused by some adolescent girls on spectral evidence, he doesn't really think a whole lot of it. He thinks it's a really stupid idea. And he also thinks that it's going to turn into nothing. You know, it's the richest man in Salem. You know, they're not going to kill him. Why would they do that? He had some friends that did not share his confidence. Anywho, like I said, Philip English was connected. So instead of staying here at the Salem jail, he was transferred down to the Boston jail. He also had enough money to pay the bail. And bail worked a little bit differently in the 17th century than it does today. You know, he paid his 4,000 pounds, but he could go around Boston, continue doing his business. He just had to sleep in the jail at night. Well, he does that. And one of the friends that he has in Boston is a minister of the First Church. And this minister says to English, like, hey, you and Mary should really get out, go to New York. They might kill you. And he's like, you know, it's not a lot of money. I really don't want to, you know, flee bail, you know. Clear my name is like, the minister reminded him of what happened to Rebecca Nurse. Nurse is an interesting character. She is convicted. Yes, she is on Samuel Parris's most favorite persons list. But her great crime happened to be a 17th century woman involved in town politics. Most of her neighbors liked her because, honestly, everybody's a farmer. There's not a whole lot of time. And she's competent, so. But she told the Reverend Samuel Parris that he probably owned some land in Topsfield, too. So not only did he owe taxes to Salem Village, he probably also owed some taxes to Topsfield. Yeah, no salary, not surprised he's pissed. But, you know, he's not a really great character anyway. You know, not somebody, you know, go around murdering his neighbors just because he's pissed off at them. You know, nothing like that at all. Anywho, Nurse is originally acquitted, and Judge Corwin looks back at the jury when they give the verdict and says, I don't think we've looked at all the evidence. Let's examine more of the evidence. And Nurse is later convicted. Anywho, that does not bode well for the prospects for Philip and Mary English. The minister buys a ticket for Philip and Mary English. Yes, a man on a minister's salary is buying a ticket on another ship to a man who owns 21 ships, hands them the ticket and says, get on board, go, do not stay here. And Philip English is like, no, I'm not leaving. The minister gives him an argument. He quotes from the Gospel of John. If they persecute you in your own city, go to another. It finally dawns on Philip English what he's being told. You know, the court's going to kill him. Either he pleads guilty to witchcraft, and before nobody who pled guilty to the witch trials in 1692 is executed. However, the most common way of executing witches in New England was confessing. The reason they got off was almost certainly how the trials ended. So Philip English is looking at that and saying, okay, I get what you're saying. He takes the ticket, and he and Mary head down to New York. let's return to the witch trials. And as I was saying, they were getting out of control. Well, not only did they accuse Philip and Mary English and a few other notable people as well, they did the wildly intelligent thing of accusing the governor's wife, to which, no, they did not give her a writ, because when it was suggested that Mary Phipps was going to have to stand trial for witchcraft, Williams Phipps finally took an interest and said, I don't believe my wife is a witch, and the colonial militia agrees with me. Well, needless to say, the court of Oyer is very quickly terminated after that, and then to cement the deal in late October 29th to be exact, Phipps signs a proclamation saying there are not going to be any more accusations of witchcraft. Yeah, he didn't want to get accused himself. That would have been a bit awkward. Anyway, court's terminated. He sets up a superior court to try the rest of the cases. Most of the people are acquitted. It's the 17th century. You're worried about those other people. That's mostly winning. Anyway, the trial is over. Everybody's acquitted. Philip and Mary English come back to Salem. Well, they fled bail. Did the town of Salem look at Philip English's mansion? Which, no, it's not where St. Peter's is. It's at the corner. It was at the corner of Essex and English Street. Did they look at that mansion and say, we will leave it perfectly intact for when this is over and Philip and Mary English come back? Heck no. They were like, dude, he fled bail. He confesses to being a witch. Let's ransack this place. And they strip it bare. They do have the good sense to not take his ships or warehouses, but his mansion, there is not a stick of furniture. There is no draperies. There's no clothing. There's nothing left. Well, Philip and Mary English return back to Salem and see this denuded house, and he is pissed. They have taken about 1,000 pounds worth of his stuff, and he wants it back. Anywho, what does he do? Like any good businessman, he sues. He sues Salem. He sues Massachusetts. He sues individuals involved. You better believe it. He is suing the sheriff of Essex County, George Corwin. He is suing the judge, Jonathan Corwin. He is suing the judge, John Hathorne. He is suing even the Reverend Noyes, who is the minister at the First Church in Salem. Well, the court cases don't provide Philip English with his 1,000 pounds. This somewhat becomes his bugbear in life. Like in 1711, Massachusetts has completely changed its mind on the witch trials, and he's even offering reparations for the victims of the witch trials, and offers Philip English to give Philip English 200 pounds. Yeah, it's a lot better than most people. And he refuses. He says he wants his 1,000 pounds or nothing. Well, even as a tottery old man, he would go. He's like, there's a story of him as a tottery old man. He's bald as a cue ball. He's a tottery old man walking into the center of Salem, and he accosts the equally aged Reverend Noyes right outside his church and says to him, "You're a murderer! You killed Rebecca Nurse and Giles Corey, and a thief! You stole my 1,000 pounds! Where's my 1,000 pounds?" Well, anyway, very old, distinguished man. Needless to say, a crowd gathers between the two men to try and separate these two elderly gentlemen. Come on, Mr. English, calm down a little bit. You'll hurt yourself. It does not nearly work. Philip English is arrested and fined for a public disturbance. Now, this does not happen once. This does not happen twice. There are 3 recorded events of Philip English making a public disturbance. 2 of this when he is elderly. Now, as I can say, this is an Episcopal church, and it was the very first Anglican church in Salem. Now, there are some rumors that Philip English was always an Episcopalian because he was an immigrant from the island of Jersey. That's wrong. He was a Huguenot, French Calvinist. He was a leader of the Huguenot community here in Salem. And when he went to church, he almost certainly went to the first church in Salem. His wife, Mary, was a full member of the first church in Salem. But I do have to say, being accused of witchcraft by the minister of your wife's church is a really dang good reason for not wanting to go to church. Anywho, let us return to the year 1733. And something terrible must have happened in 1732 to inspire Philip English to donate the money. And no, he does not die. He dies in 36. That terrible thing that happened is that in 1732, Philip English's daughter becomes a member of the accursed First Church in Salem. Well, Philip English will have none of it. This is a time in which England wants to bring Massachusetts closer in to the broader English-speaking world. And they're spending money on things like Anglican missionaries. Well, there's an Anglican missionary in Marblehead, so Philip English gets in touch with him immediately after his daughter joins the First Church in Salem and tells the man, I will donate some land under one proviso, that you build an Anglican church in downtown Salem. Anywho, the land where St. Peter's is on was not originally owned by Philip English. It was originally owned by one Jonah Marsden, but he went bankrupt. Philip English got the land for a song, donated it to the Anglican missionary, and they built St. Peter's. The current building you're seeing here was built in 1833, 100 years after the original building, which was made out of wood. This building is stone. Now, Philip English did become an Anglican, and he did forgive the Reverend Noyes on his deathbed. He is reputed to have said, I forgive the Reverend Noyes, but if I get better, I take it back. Anywho, behind the church, there used to be a churchyard where Philip English was buried. His gravestone no longer survives. And among those graves, it's been rumored that you can see a bald-headed, tawdry old man roaming at the witching hour. It has been rumored that that was Philip English guarding his investment. Now, in the 1950s, they needed a car park. Well, the headstones were moved, and we will walk in front of the church. You will see to where they are, and there's not enough room for the bodies. So, today, St. Peter's Episcopal Church has the only haunted parking lot in Salem. All right, the next place we're going is the old jail.